We originally lived on the west side of Chicago, and I think when I was around 10 or 13, we moved to Hyde Park, which is south. I remained in the south side. I went to grammar school and high school in Hyde Park. I went to Hyde Park High School. So we were sort of Hyde Parkers, not far from where our former president lived. Kind of nice when you think about it. My father was in real estate. He owned several and managed hotels. I never knew my grandfather, but my grandmother always lived with us, my mother's mother. My father always told a story that he was working for Jake Siegel, who was my mother's oldest sister's husband. And he worked behind, when people check in, he came in to check the books or whatever, I don't know, to see who was in and who was out, And he asked my dad what he was doing, and he was getting off, and I don't know, he said nothing. So he said, so why don't you come with me? So he said, I'm going over to my mother-in-law's. So my father went with him. He had to fix something up at my grandmother's house. And my father came up and he met my mother, who was there, and that's how they met. We didn't do too much because we didn't travel on buses and streetcars. Sort of stayed in the neighborhood and played jump rope and things like that. I remember my father had a car, I must have been 10 or 13 or something like that. My grandmother lived with us. Sometimes we drove to Benton Harbor, Michigan, and she used to stay there for a week or two, for the baths. And then we came back. He had family in Iowa, in Sioux City, Iowa. And I remember sometimes we used to go in there in the summertime. So I remember going to Sioux City, Iowa, and my Uncle George used to come with us. He was a bachelor. And sometimes he went with us and the whole family, a lot of family. And I remember going to Kalamazoo, Michigan as a teenager. My father had a great aunt and uncle that lived there. So whenever they came to Chicago, they'd stop and visit. And I remember one summer, I think I was there for about a week. And it was fun, going someplace different. It was during the war, and they used to have these get-togethers, USO. I think that's what they were called. And I met him there. Well, he was in the Navy. He was in Great Lakes. And I don't know, I guess I don't remember. I know we met there. But then later on, I think he called me and he came over, and I think we went to the movies or something like that. It's a long time ago. I remember my mother and father were sort of hesitant about it, because here was somebody from New York, and they didn't know him. But he was a nice gentleman, and they said, okay. So we went to the movies. We wrote letters back and forth. It was a big deal. You got to write a letter every day. That was the day when you looked for the postman. And then he started calling me long distance once a week. And then he came to visit, and I guess it progressed from there. He was a yeoman. I remember that. Something to do with shorthand, like a secretary. Because when he was, before he joined the Navy, he worked for the post office. We got married and we lived in Chicago. We lived in Hyde Park, and then we lived, when the kids were growing up, we lived at 3400 Roscoe Street, north. It was a 3-flat building that my father owned, and they were 3 stories, and on each floor, the apartment was like 8 or 9 rooms. You had 3 bathrooms and 4 or 5 bedrooms. And so it was like living in a house, but it was 3 stories. And then when the children were growing up, that's when we first moved to the suburbs, and we first moved to Wilmette. And stayed there for a long time. And then after the children grew up and went to high school and graduated and everything, the apartment was too big, you know, so. And then my husband had passed away, your grandfather, and I didn't need such a big place, so I moved here, and I've been here ever since, over 30 years. Once I graduated, I went to college for 2 years. Then I got married, then I worked, and then I became a parent, and I stayed home and worked in the house and cooked and baked and whatever. I went back to work when after high school, I think, you know, they left. Everybody went their own way, so there was nothing to do. So I did go back to work, yeah. I kind of found it refreshing. It was different. It was something to get away from and enjoy people. My mother was stricter than my father. You know, she was with us all the time. But when we got a little noisy or rambunctious, she used to call my father. And he really, you know, it was really bad. He took over, but most of the time she was in command.
What was your husband, my grandpa, what was he like?
He was very quiet and mellow and very seldom raised his voice unless somebody got out of hand. But he was very calm about everything. I never saw him get mad except once. We always celebrated Thanksgiving and Hanukkah. And Passover was always part of, you know, the spring holiday. And that's when everybody, Jewish people, changed their dishes, you know. Your everyday dishes, you put away, and for a week you ate just strictly nothing with leavened bread. And it was matzah, and you had separate sets of dishes and pots. That was because my grandmother kept kosher, and she lived with us. You know, Friday come, everybody was in the kitchen baking or getting dinner ready for the weekend. It was a festive time. It was always cooking on Friday. It was different growing up in a situation like that compared to today. Today you don't do those things. I mean, once a year maybe for Thanksgiving. This is what we did when we were growing up. There were many arguments. This is for milk and this is for meat. People, they'd forget, and it was kind of funny. People that didn't know about this, they would come in and they'd accidentally put the wrong dish in the wrong place. So, yeah, it was fun growing up. It was kind of nice, there was always somebody there. Yeah, I got a lot of nice memories. You're reliving my life.